to just give a brief review of The Handmaid's Tale. It is an awesome, awesome, awesome visualization of Margaret Atwood's book that came out. Now they're saying it's 30 years old. I'd like to also briefly mention two reviews of The Handmaid's Tale. I've read a few in The Guardian, but I'd like to just briefly speak about the one that's in The Economist, since I've got it physically right here. It is from the April 22nd edition with Theresa May on the cover. And also Time magazine has done an interview between Elizabeth Moss, the star, and Margaret Atwood, the author of the book, against the finale of the 10-part series. And in it, they give two interesting definitions, one of which they come up with together. So now, I guess, in this review, I'm speaking to those who are interested in, have somehow engaged in the material, so I'm not going to rehash or give you a summary of what happened, other than to say that where this article describes it, it's a nightmarish dystopian world. And what makes sci-fi relevant or interesting, and this is just how they're defining sci-fi, and then so The Handmaid's Tale fits within that genre, it's familiar and incongruous. It exists on the peripheries of possibilities. So what they're saying is, in order for it to be sci-fi, this genre, why it's so luring and interesting to people is because it's right there on the cusp of what we think is real or actually could be. Now, here's what's interesting. In the interview on the Time magazine's website, Elizabeth Moss says that, recalls that Margaret Atwood told her that everything that happens in The Handmaid's Tale has actually happened in somewhere, sometime on this planet. So Margaret Atwood didn't just pull the horrendous things that happened out of the hat. She pieced and put them together from history. And that's the first thing. And so The Handmaid's Tale then becomes a challenge to the idea that it is sci-fi. It's fiction, fictionalized reality. And that's the interesting part about where media sits today and why it's so important that we have spaces like Netflix, and now Hulu is following Netflix's mode of having material for these wide range of audiences that challenge the network model that's dependent on advertising. Now you can have really deep stories like this. You will get even more authors who will write their books and have them depicted in such a way because there's this space for them in cyber TV media consumption. And so that means that there will be different variations of what we call sci-fi, and this melding together what's reality. And people, I think we must acknowledge that while Margaret Atwood wrote this book far before the era of Trump, it's not difficult to imagine that just like Star Trek, predicted the mobile phone, Margaret Atwood really helped us to see where all of this was leading, where the values that we had at the time, where this was going if we didn't intervene, and we haven't intervened. And so people, just like this article even begins with, are wondering what this looks like in the era of Trump. And I'll just try and find that quote, because every review that I've seen about this looks at this from the lens of, how did this happen? And we're in an era of Trump where women's rights and women's reproductive rights are at the center, again, of the political, economic, culture wars. And so, and we're saying it's the culture war. And this is the part of the culture that we're seeing reflected the policy and the social struggles around tradition and modernity, and you see this played out on women's bodies. And so that we see this in our fiction and reality should inform one another, and I think that's what's so telling and why people are so interested in The Handmaid's Tale. And so for me, and this is what I'd like to just lead my review to highlight, is that we must understand that there is a very clear connection between women's economic freedom and women's reproductive freedom and therefore reproductive rights. And so, yeah, it is, horrendous when we see, again, iconic images of Trump signing into law, literally showing him and a bunch of he's surrounding signing into law, removing funding from Planned Parenthood, for example, again discussed in this article. And it's just the idea that you would have a group of men who would be controlling women's bodies, and yet we see it as just, oh, these are just whittling away at these rights over here, but we fail to see how reproductive rights are connected to women's economic freedom. And so just to highlight that, and this, I think this show does this glowingly. The first thing that happens is, of course, women are stripped of their jobs, bank accounts, and property, and handed over to their husbands or male next of kin, and forbidden from reading. And in a lot of the other reviews, they point out how, even as the women are being escorted out of their jobs, men are holding the doors open for them and being really polite and really understanding. They show a scene in one of the episodes of a group of frat boys who are just oblivious to the fact that these women have been stripped of their rights. There's another review that talks about, again, where I'd like to lead my review to, is the notion of feminism, what feminism means. And so, there's an iconic scene within I keep using this word iconic because there's just scenes within the series that show us who we are and where we are. And this is why such a series has been so important. So they show the basic everyday sexism. So Elizabeth Moss and all women have been stripped of their jobs, their bank accounts, or money, and they're sitting talking. She's sitting talking with her husband or partner, or fiance at the time, mother of her child, everything. And all he can say is, I'll take care of you. And it looks ridiculous, not only because standing there to witness this is, their best friend, and it comes to bear, and many times later in the series, of why their friendship is so important, a black lesbian, Pusey from Orange is the New Black. And it's like, well, who's going to take care of her? And in this day and age, when we're thinking about, it's not whether or not you agree or disagree with whether or not there should be a black lesbian or whether or not she should have rights. But the fact is, she's there in this room with this family, with a normative family. So even we're threatening the everyday American family with the idea of constantly trying to exclude and draw lines around who is normal. And we do this, and this is what's so insidious, is because we lose the sense of why we do this. We lose ourselves in the struggle because it still comes down to reproduction. It's as if we build an entire policy of family law and reproductive law based on the idea that there must be, the heteropatriarchal family must exist. And that's the center of the capitalist project. And so at the head of this heteropatriarchal family must be, a male head, a female who is there to reproduce by any means, hence a handmaid, because fertility, it's dystopia because we've basically driven our fertility to a low because of how we abused the planet and our resources. And so it's really telling. And so in the interview, this is where I'll close, the interview that Margaret Atwood does with Elizabeth Moss, who's interviewing Q, Moss asks herself out loud, what is feminism? Moss says, I'm a feminist, I carry the label. And Atwood says, well, I approach it more hesitantly. I allow people to say, well, what is your idea of feminism? And I'll tell you if that fits who I am and how I identify myself. And so Moss says, and they come up with a joint definition. So Moss says, for feminism for her means that she believes in human rights. And she goes on to say, and that means that women are, and Atwood finishes, human. So together we come up with this definition of feminism. It means that women are human. That's what feminism is. So anything about man-hating or bra burning, any other attribute that you would attribute to the term or the label or declaring yourself feminism only detracts from the fact of this basic and fundamental meaning. And again, you could say it's even the point of showing us The Handmaid's Tale, is so that we're reminded that women are human. You got a future in front of you.